How's it going, guys? Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, coming to you guys with a very heavy Steelers-related episode here today. They were one of the busiest teams, if not the busiest team, this past weekend in free agency. So I'm going to talk a lot about them today, but as well, I'm going to include the latest stories on the New York Jets signing their new left tackle in Tyron Smith and basically having a new offensive line this coming year for Aaron Rodgers. Me liking that move a lot. I'm going to get into that, as well as Keenan Allen and his latest comments on why he left the Los Angeles Chargers, plus the Steelers news that I mentioned on Kenny Pickett getting traded to the Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm also going to talk about Justin Fields coming over to the Pittsburgh Steelers. All of that and all the details surrounding that coming to you guys on today's episode. Before I jump into the Chip Shot story of the day, I want to remind you guys not only to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, but to also use the tip and donations link running across the ticker down below me with any questions or comments that you may have throughout the duration of this show. If you're able to do this, it allows me to see any of your questions, comments on the right-hand side here on the chat box, and it makes it a lot more interesting for me. It's a lot more conversational with any of these topics, with you guys giving me your feedback. So if you guys are able to use the tip and donations link, which is gsmcpodcast.net, it makes it a lot more fun, and it's a big help for this show, and we greatly appreciate it every time you guys are able to do that with any of your questions. In saying that, I'm able to move into the first segment, as always, being the Chip Shot story of the day. This time surrounding wide receiver Keenan Allen, the new Chicago Bears wide receiver, I should say Keenan Allen, and a trade that surprised a lot of people, especially me, because when I saw it, it made me think of a lot of things that I talked on this episode about, one being the Chargers and their salary cap situation and how they had to make some tough decisions heading into this new year. If they wanted to build a competitive team, they had to make a decision around Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Joey Bosa, and Khalil Mack. And initially, it looked to me, since nothing was really getting done, I thought it was going to be Khalil Mack or Joey Bosa that were going to be gone or traded or something like that. And instead, it was the other two when the Chargers released Mike Williams and then they traded Keenan Allen. A lot of speculation came around the Keenan Allen deal to the Chicago Bears, especially only for a fourth-round pick. I think that was the detail that really drew everybody in because, Keenan Allen is coming off of probably his best season statistically with the Los Angeles Chargers. I know they didn't have a great record, but he himself individually had great stats, had great performances, and came up big a lot for Justin Herbert. But he goes over to Chicago now to start a new chapter at 31 years old. He'll be 32, I think, in April. So basically 32 years old. But like I mentioned, starting a new chapter in his career where he spent the majority, or all of it, I should say, with the Los Angeles Chargers, recording over 900 receptions and 10,000 yards with the Chargers. He's definitely going to be missed, especially with all the offseason moves that the Chargers have made to, I think, prioritize defense now that Jim Harbaugh's coming in, and he's really known for having a great defense. Just look at the Michigan team that he had last year. They were built on defense, built in the trenches, and doing all the dirty work, and he garnered a lot of really good performances. He won the national championship, obviously, and I think he's trying to bring that over to the Los Angeles Chargers, and because of that, I think that's why Keenan Allen and Mike Williams were the chosen ones to depart from this team. And Keenan Allen, at his introductory press conference, spoke a little bit more about it. He was obviously asked about, the reasons why he decided to leave. And the first thing he said was, obviously, I wanted to finish my career with the Chargers, but things happen, and you've got to keep going. Things like a new head coach, Jim Harbaugh, coming in, a new general manager, and Joe Hortiz coming in. Those two coming in, when you look at that, a new personnel, there's always going to be changes with new personnel coming in, and I think this is one of the reasons that a lot of people aren't really pointing to it, is that Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz don't have the connection, haven't seen or been around Keenan Allen, the person, as much. They don't have that emotional connection that other personnel teams would have had with Keenan Allen, seeing him grow up there, being drafted there, and whatnot. Jim Harbaugh and Joe Hortiz have been assigned a duty to make this team better, and they can't make it better if they have a huge salary cap issue that they're trying to deal with, always holding them back. So, this, in my opinion, was more of a business decision, and it was easier to make because, like I mentioned, they don't have that personal connection to Keenan Allen. It was strictly business. They're still really trying to get to know each other at this point, and it was reported that they approached Keenan Allen about a contract restructure, and as you all know, most likely know, Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack agreed to lowering that salary cap or restructuring their contract in some aspect. They went to Keenan Allen with the same thing, and he actually rejected it. And to that whole situation and topic, he said, there really was no emotion. It was, I'm not doing it. I'm not doing it. Came off of my best season, so it's not happening. Basically just giving the reason why this decision was really a no-brainer for Harbaugh and Hortiz because of, that salary cap situation. The biggest thing that these two have to do for their own personal benefit and not only keeping their job but actually wanting to make this team better and see it succeed, they can't go into doing that with such a huge salary cap number. And with Keenan Allen refusing to lower his contract or restructure it in some way, I think they really had no issue pulling that Band-Aid off and cutting ties with Keenan Allen because of that. And now you start a new era where you could potentially see the Chargers going a different way in terms of style and trying to win in a different way, almost going away from that five-wide spread vertical offense with all these offensive weapons. Now I think Harbaugh is trying to shift it over to more of a defensive perspective, trying to get this team a bit more nastier and meaner to not intimidate the other teams, but just change it because it obviously hasn't been working with this offense being as prolific and exciting as it has been with Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert throwing it all over the field. Mike Williams, Austin Eckler, they're not coming off of their best season, but that was sort of their identity. That clearly hasn't worked. Their defense has been pretty poor, quite honestly. So I think Harbaugh, that's the biggest mission he's come in with. And now looking forward from another aspect, looking at it from the Chicago Bears aspect and seeing that you have Keenan Allen now, it begs the question, is this the best situation that any of the rookie quarterbacks this year could fall into? I think it has a very good argument of being that. I would put it very closely with the Washington Commanders. I think those two are the best situation for any of these rookie quarterbacks, and I think they're the most quarterback-ready teams now. I know a few weeks ago, when I was just starting this show, I mentioned that the Bears really weren't ready to make any sort of move for a quarterback that they should trade down. But now you add Keenan Allen, you see Ryan Poles making these moves to improve this team and really support a rookie quarterback, unlike how they did with Justin Fields, and I'll get into all of that later in the show. Now they have a very capable team of going out there. They got DeAndre Swift. They brought in Keenan Allen, obviously. They already had DJ Moore. And now this team, you look around and you're seeing a good running back, very good two wide receivers that a quarterback can throw to. And now, whether it's Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams, I think they'll be able to at least have a chance to succeed, which is the biggest thing. Before, I didn't see any real chance of that happening. But now you have all these weapons, so I'm liking what the Bears are doing, and I'm more open to them taking that quarterback, which they probably will. It's always been rumored that they were going to take Caleb or Jaden. They could surprise everybody, but now I think it all but guarantees that they're going to stay with that pick. They're doing everything to support whichever quarterback comes in, and I'm liking it. It's close between them and the Commanders, which is a better situation, but we will see how it all plays out. And this almost reminds me of the Green Bay Packers a little bit last year. I know Jordan Love wasn't a rookie last year, but he got his first chance to start, and there was this young, exciting offense with all these pieces that they were trying to fit together. It almost reminds me of that. If it's Caleb Williams, all these guys can almost grow together. I know they're all older than him, but they're able to help Caleb Williams grow into this thing that it's going to probably take the whole season to materialize and see it all play out to its full potential. But just like the Packers had these exciting weapons, a solid running game, good weapons on the outside, I think it's similar to that in that aspect. And it looked like they weren't going anywhere at the start. But once Caleb Williams or Jordan Love, I should say last year, started getting his footing, started getting a real feel for it, and they found their identity, I think it could go a similar way for Caleb Williams. And I'm excited to see that happen. The Bears haven't been a real threat in the last few years. They haven't really been prolific on offense at all since who knows when. I can't really remember just off the top of my head when the Chicago Bears have been great on offense. Now, you look at their offense and you're thinking, all right, they have some pieces. It's a little bit intriguing now. You want to see how it all plays out. So from that aspect and the comparison with the Packers, I do see a little bit of similarity there. And going on with this a little bit further, say it doesn't go right and it goes the other way, more pressure on Matt Eberflus or Ryan Poles now to get this all right, because now you have legitimate reason to be successful. I would probably go with Matt Eberflus just because I mentioned before he wasn't an offensive coach coming in. He's only worked on the defensive side of the ball. So that fit could potentially hold him back. I don't think there'd be pressure on Ryan Poles because he's been proactive in free agency, in trades, trying to make this team better. He's put an effort to make this team better, and I think Eberflus could be looked at not fitting the part of now having this exciting offense to really work with. So between the two of them, I would probably go Eberflus and think that he would get fired if this thing goes really bad before Ryan Poles. But again, a lot of things could happen, so we'll see where that ends up. And now, just to wrap up this whole segment on the Bears and looking forward, they also have another top 10 pick, number 9, specifically in the draft. Now, what do you do with that? Before it was rumored that they were going to get a wide receiver there, but now getting Keenan Allen, where else do you look towards to potentially improve? You could go edge rusher at number 9. I think there still would be a lot of some of the top edge rushers left at number 9. Or you could potentially go offensive line and give more protection to whichever rookie quarterback you draft. That's never a bad option in my opinion. Or you could even trade it, move down a little bit, and see what your options are later in the draft. You'll build more draft capital, and you could potentially take that route now. I'm also a fan of that. I'm not saying or thinking that they're going to do that. I think number 9 is still a position where a lot of teams wouldn't trade out of unless a crazy offer comes in. So the Bears, definitely now, I think more than ever, they have a lot more options, positive options that could only really improve their team. And I'm liking what they're doing. I'm a big fan of what Ryan Poles has done, not being afraid to pull the trigger on a lot of these things. And he's been proactive and been very aggressive. And on that note, I'm going to continue to talk about Ryan Poles later in this show, but that's going to do it for that segment. The Bears are trending in the right direction. There's still a good talking point for me as this show goes on. But for now, we're going to go to a quick break, and on the other side of that break, more on the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Chicago Bears and the trades with the Philadelphia Eagles, all surrounding Kenny Pickett and Justin Fields. I'm going to break it all down for you on the other side of the break, as well as Tyron Smith joining the New York Jets on a 1-year deal and how exciting their new offensive line is looking for them in 2024. So don't go anywhere. All of those stories are coming up right here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Back here on the show, going into the second segment of this live episode, talking about the New York Jets and their newest signing, Tyron Smith, from the Dallas Cowboys to be the New York Jets' new left tackle. A move that happened over this past weekend, only a one-year deal for the former Cowboys left tackle, but it could be worth up to $20 million based on incentives and playing time. It's $6.5 million guaranteed, with that other $13.5 million to be based and earned on playing time. The minimum playing time that needs to happen for Tyron Smith before he earns a little bit of those incentives and a little bit of that money is only 38%. So undoubtedly he's probably going to get it just based on the way he's been trending recently with the injuries that he's dealt with, the time that he's missed. He played 13 games last year and has stayed relatively on the healthy side in the last few years. He hasn't played a full season since 2015, so it's not like he's been this Iron Man, always in playing every game. Based on his age as well, he is on the older side. But regardless of all of that, I think it's still a good sign for this New York Jets team that I talked about it on a segment before. With this team, it seemed like last year everybody was ready to crown them AFC Conference Championships, ready to send them to the Super Bowl because they did have some reason to do it. Their defense was exciting. It was young. Sauce Gardner, Quinn Williams. They had all those studs really on the defensive side of the ball. So that was exciting. But offensively, once they got Aaron Rodgers, everybody assumed that it was going to be a transition into this contending team heading into the 2023 season, and it really couldn't have been further from that. I know Aaron Rodgers got hurt, and I know it was a freak thing to have him injured just like 4 or 5 plays into the season, but after that, if this team was really prepared to jump into contender status and be ready to compete with the Kansas City Chiefs in their division with the Buffalo Bills and the Baltimore Ravens, I think you would have seen them in a lot closer games, and they put a lot of ugly performances out there, and I think most of that was because of the offensive line. They got a quarterback, but what good is a quarterback if you can't protect him and support him with the pieces around him? On top of that, it was just not a good look. I know Zach Wilson didn't perform to the best of his abilities, but again, the offensive line was in and out. They had a lot of missing pieces. Last year, they had actually 9 offensive linemen play games at 2 or more positions across that offensive line. Arguably their best offensive lineman, Elijah Vera Tucker, got injured as well, so he missed a big part of the season. And he's, funny enough, the only one that remains from the offensive line last year. The Jets' offensive line last year consisted of Mekhi Becton, Laken Tomlinson, Dwan Brown, Connor McGovern, and Elijah Vera Tucker, like I mentioned. Now, General Manager Joe Douglas has been very active in free agency, attacking the offensive line problem, knows how vital it is for Aaron Rodgers to stay healthy, because with Aaron Rodgers, it obviously gives you a chance to compete, in which a lot of the times last year in these games, it looked like their offense wasn't even out there. The defense was on the field the majority of the time. And now they've assessed it early in free agency, and now their offensive line looks almost completely brand new with Tyron Smith at left tackle. They signed Joe Simpson from the Baltimore Ravens. He played all the games that the Ravens were in last year, so that's a good sign as well for that offensive line to stay healthy coming off of last year. Their right guard now is solidified as Elijah Vera Tucker, and their right tackle is also from the Baltimore Ravens when they traded for Morgan Moses as well. So they got two Baltimore Ravens coming off of a very good performance for the Baltimore Ravens and how good they were able to run the ball and protect Lamar Jackson. So that was a good evidence of what they could bring. And center is going to be Joe Tippmann for them, most likely, their second-round pick last year. He's the only one that's, you could be questionable on. But regardless of that, he is the only weak spot, I guess you could say. All the other guys are experienced, have experienced success at their other respective teams. Now they come to the Jets with Aaron Rodgers. Everybody knows what he could bring. I think it'll be a smoother transition now, and we're going to be able to see what this Jets offense can really do when Aaron Rodgers is able to stand in that pocket, withhold that pressure, and throw it to Garrett Wilson or hand it off to Breece Hall. But on the other hand, that's almost where it actually ends, because other than Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall, who else on that offense can you confidently give the ball to? They recently just departed from their old tight end, CJ Uzama. They still have Alan Lazard on the team, which is a good thing for Aaron Rodgers and that familiarity there with him. But he's not really a number 2 receiver that you're confident can make a difference out there on the field in terms of receptions, getting yards after the catch, and all of that, being exciting for Aaron Rodgers to throw to. And on top of that, you've assessed the offensive line. Aaron Rodgers, you expect him to play to the level that he's capable of once he comes back and he's fully reintegrated into everything, the team activities and whatnot. Now you can sort of shift the attention over to addressing the skill positions. And it's give and take a lot of times in free agency where you allocate your attention and where you allocate all of your resources to address the needs of your team. The Jets wisely went with the offensive line, but now you look at the other markets, you look at the wide receivers that are available, and you look at the draft a little bit. Where do you go to improve that wide receiver too? Because now I think the conversation will shift to that. I think everyone, mostly in the media and all these other outlets, are happy with what the Jets have done at offensive line, but now you need to build on the exciting part of the team, the decorations around the hypothetical cake that you've built already. You have the foundation built already with the offensive line and Aaron Rodgers. Now you need to find a wide receiver too. In that market, like I mentioned, who's really left? Because you decided to go with offensive line, you've ignored it to a little bit, and Calvin Ridley's now off the board. Keenan Allen wasn't available, but he was traded. Mike Evans re-signed with the Tampa Bay Bucks. Michael Pittman signed the long-term deal with the Indianapolis Colts. Now you look at who's really left. It's reported that Mike Williams is going to actually visit with the Jets today or potentially tomorrow morning, depending on when he lands in New Jersey. So that could still be an option. But other than that, you have Tyler Boyd and other options out there that aren't really, in my opinion, aren't really the kind of caliber that this New York Jets team needs right away, because I think they're looking for more immediate success with Aaron Rodgers, obviously in the later part of his career. A lot of these offensive linemen, like I mentioned, are in the later parts of their career. So how much time, if you do get a younger wide receiver, do you have that he could develop into this number 2 receiver that you would want to be out there every single down and distance, trying to create some sort of life in this offense? I don't really know the answer to that. I don't think the answer is in free agency, if I'm being honest. I think they're going to have to look at options in the draft. At pick number 10, I believe, is where they're located. So you still have some good options there. I don't expect the top guys to be there. Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, maybe Rome Odunze. I'm a big fan of him. I think he'd be great for the Jets. But at the same time, the Bears could draft him at number 9 and really fill out that wide receiver room for Caleb Williams or Jaden Daniels. So that's another option. But even then, do you reach, if you want to call it that, for a Brian Thomas, a A.D. Mitchell, a guy like that? How early do you consider it too early to draft the next tier or group of wide receivers? Because I think those three guys are in the tier of their own. Neighbors, Harrison, I think they won't get out of the top 6. Then Rome Odunze as well, how well these other teams like him. That's still to be determined. What other teams need wide receivers that desperately need them and will trade up? That's also another factor to consider. All these pieces are moving pieces around the Jets, and they have to determine what kind of direction they want to go. Because, like I said, this is a situation now where I think they've really established what their identity can be. They've established that Aaron Rodgers has to be protected at all times because they learned their lesson last season. And I know they gave Zach Wilson permission to seek a trade, and they actually signed Tyrod Taylor, which is a good backup option. I'm a big fan of that. But obviously you don't want to lose Aaron Rodgers again. You want to see what he could produce throwing it to Garrett Wilson. This team, I think, has so much untapped potential that I haven't even gotten to Breece Hall, who I thought was probably the most underrated player last year. A lot of the times, because they didn't have that option coming out of the backfield, they would throw it to Breece Hall out of the backfield. He would get a lot of receptions. When people would double team Garrett Wilson, it was just almost a Breece Hall show. They didn't have that much time to throw because of the offensive line. But other than that, it was all of that mixed in with what Breece Hall was able to produce. And could they switch their identity a little bit and go more run heavy, find a receiver that's not too receptions happy, isn't too needy on producing his own numbers? Could they find more of a blocking wide receiver that's there when you need it? Not really a bona fide number 2 or a number 1, but just a guy that's able to fill that role, block. And could they shift their identity more to running it with Breece Hall? I wouldn't be opposed to that. I'm a big fan of Breece Hall. He was having a great rookie year. Unfortunately, he got hurt, and last year it almost looked like he didn't miss a step. And I think they actually underutilized him a lot last year. And I wouldn't be opposed to them riding his coattails a little bit because of how special I think he is, how well he could produce. Not to mention with this new offensive line, he could really be a player that breaks out and jumps really from year 2 to year 3 and becomes the face of this team. We all know what the running back market is for these young running backs and basically any of the running backs nowadays. If you have a young one like Breece Hall just in his 3rd year, I don't see why you want to use him to the best of his ability as much as you can. In doing that, I think it could work out well for them if their options aren't there at wide receiver. Obviously, if they draft a good one in the draft and still use Breece Hall a lot, that's probably best case scenario. But if the other option is just try to find a cheap option for them in free agency, or trying to find just the plug and play guy that isn't too exciting on offense, I don't think that would be a bad idea because of how special Breece Hall is. That's where I stand on the New York Jets right now. I'm loving what they did with the offensive line. That's obviously huge. Tyron Smith is a player that will surely be missed by the Dallas Cowboys and all the New York Jets fans. Everybody in that organization, I'm sure, is happy to have him in the building, regardless of age or whatnot. If you're good, you're good, and that's what the Jets needed right now, a player of his caliber, and I'm excited to see where they go heading into next season. But in saying that, I will transition into our second break of this show, and on the other side of it, all the Steelers news is coming with the trade of Kenny Pickett to the Philadelphia Eagles, and all these storylines and reports behind that, as well as Justin Fields getting traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers and now filling out a new quarterback room with Russell Wilson over there in Pittsburgh. All of that coming up on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast up next.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC. to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Jumping into the second half of this show. Like I mentioned, it's going to be Steelers heavy on today's episode, and we're going to start with the Kenny Pickett trade that already shook up the NFL and how that affects the Steelers and even the Eagles to a certain extent. But before I do that, I want to remind you guys one last time on this show, if you have any questions or comments, please use the tip and donations link at gsmcpodcast.net. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. This should make sure your questions pop up to the right here in the chat box. I'm able to read them and engage with you guys throughout the show. We always appreciate it. It's a big help for this show and all the shows across the network. And it's always a big thanks from us anytime you guys are able to do that and show that generosity with the shows. Going back to the topic at hand, the Pittsburgh Steelers and all the moves that they've made. I have mentioned it before, I am a Steelers fan, and in all my time of supporting this team, following this team, I don't think I've ever seen them make so many moves in just regardless of the first week. I think this is the most moves I've seen them make in any free agency, and how aggressive they've pursued what they wanted, how determined they've been to get what they want. I think it's a breath of fresh air. And it started, or the biggest move started with Kenny Pickett being traded to the Eagles. The Steelers traded Kenny Pickett and their original fourth-round pick, the 120th overall pick in 2024, to the Philadelphia Eagles, and the Eagles traded their original third-round pick, number 98 overall, and their two highest seventh-round picks in 2025, the other way to Pittsburgh. So the Eagles get a new backup quarterback for Jalen Hurts after they traded away Marcus Mariota and were in need of a new backup quarterback. They probably get one of the best ones in Kenny Pickett, and the Steelers are able to move forward now with Russell Wilson officially as their starter. Before all that was being discussed and Russell Wilson was being rumored to come to Pittsburgh, a lot of the news was, who's going to start? Is it going to be a competition? Should Kenny deserve to start because he's been there the longest, or does Russell deserve to start because he has produced better numbers than Kenny Pickett just in the past? So there was all those questions surrounding that, and it was ultimately decided when reports came out afterwards that Kenny wasn't really handling the Russell Wilson trade to the best that he could. Do you have questions about who Kenny is, character-wise, and stuff like that? That's a different conversation. But those were the reports, specifically from Jerry Dulac, that covers the Steelers for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He reported on his X account that the Steelers decided to move on from Kenny Pickett because of the way Pickett poorly handled the Russell Wilson arrival, and that's according to sources. Coming back off the back of last season when Pickett refused to dress in the Week 16 game against the Seahawks. That was another story. A lot of people zoned in on him, refusing to be the quarterback 3, refusing to dress. That was a whole big story that kind of just was pushed under the carpet because, it's towards the end of the season. Kenny wasn't coming back, so you could afford to move on from that. But now, the way Kenny's handled the Russell Wilson trade or the signing, and now makes you think back to that. All of that kind of was grouped together, and I think the Steelers, Mike Tomlin always says it, they want volunteers, not hostages there, and if Kenny was going to have a long phase, have a bad attitude about it, if all of that does wind up to be true, Kenny had his introductory press conference today, and obviously he didn't say he reacted like that, but if it does wind up to be true, then, I don't think it does good to anybody, the Steelers or Kenny Pickett, that he stayed any longer. Kenny went up to the Steelers after the Russell Wilson trade and requested a new, fresh start. In his press conference today, like I mentioned, he said he just felt it was the best time to move on. He didn't really address any of these other stories, but that's kind of where Dulac is coming from and what he's heard from all of his sources. On top of that, another story that came out from Dulac was that as soon as the Russell Wilson signing was reported and everybody found out about it, he said that Kenny Pickett actually canceled the workouts that he had with all the wide receivers during their offseason, and he canceled that, obviously because of the signing, and that was sort of what led into all of this sort of breaking out with the reports on Kenny Pickett and how he was handling all of this. Russell Wilson actually texted Kenny Pickett as soon as he got to Pittsburgh. He said it in his press conference that he said, as soon as I made the decision to come here, I texted Kenny Pickett and got to talk to him a little bit and just tell him, hey, every day we go out there, let's be the best version of ourselves and try to make this team better. Russell Wilson's probably the best guy at never saying the wrong thing. So, that makes sense. Probably true based on who Russell Wilson is as a person. He didn't say if Kenny responded, or obviously now you see Kenny Pickett getting traded. He wasn't really having any of that. So that was where all of this kind of bubbled up from, where all of this was coming from. And on the other side of that story, talking about Kenny Pickett and how he reacted, Aditi Kimkabwala from the NFL.com reported also on the issue, kind of going back at the reports that Kenny wasn't really handling this the right way. She said that the Steelers explicitly told Russell Wilson that he was going to start, going back on the idea that Kenny Pickett was finally going to have the idea to start for the Pittsburgh Steelers and have an actual chance of proving himself with a new offense, a notable offensive coordinator. And you take that and everything else that I just said, a lot of people could agree with Kenny Pickett if those reports are true. If you paint this whole situation as a competition, that's how you sell it as to Kenny Pickett. Yeah, he's going to be upset about it, but, if it's a competition, I am almost certain that he would have agreed to that, not have reacted too badly if you assured it was going to be a competition. But if this report is true and they told Russell Wilson, quietly once he signed, and then broke the news to Kenny Pickett, like, Russell's most likely going to start, you could see where Kenny Pickett could feel a certain way about it and feel upset, and in the moment ask for a trade out of there. Like I mentioned before, if he's not going to be happy, not really contribute morally to this team, I think it was probably best that he do that, and that's most likely what ended up happening. Now he can sign a new deal with the Philadelphia Eagles, and it was also reported that the Eagles, like I mentioned, were in the backup quarterback market. They actually reached out to the Bears for Justin Fields, but a deal couldn't get done there. So they moved over to Kenny Pickett and signing him to be their backup quarterback. And there was already connection there. A lot of pictures and a lot of news broke out after that. Kenny Pickett obviously grew up in New Jersey. He went to high school actually in Ocean Township. Funny enough, I saw him play against my high school my senior year. So to see him be the quarterback of my favorite team in the NFL was pretty crazy, and I felt that I had that connection there with Kenny, but it obviously didn't work out the way it should have or the way I thought it would. A lot of this Kenny Pickett idea with him going to Pitt and being around the Steelers already, I think a lot of people rolled that sentimental, nostalgic vibe with Kenny Pickett, because now looking back at that quarterback class and how everybody's ended up now to this day from the time they were drafted, it's pretty insane of how under evaluated that class was, I guess, to a certain extent, and really how there was only one quarterback from that draft that turned out to be, or not turned out to be, because nobody expected Brock Purdy to be the starter and quarterbacking a team into a Super Bowl. It really turned out to be a complete opposite way that a lot of people had it projected out to be. Kenny Pickett was the first one drafted. He was traded. Then Desmond Ridder was drafted 74th overall. He was just traded. Malik Willis is the Titans' backup or third-string quarterback. Now, Matt Corral isn't even in the NFL anymore. When he was drafted 94th overall, Bailey Zappi hasn't had a great career thus far, and he's the Patriots' backup now. Sam Howell just also got traded to the Seattle Seahawks. And like I mentioned, Brock Purdy, the last guy drafted in that draft, turned out to be the best quarterback of all of those guys. So when I saw that stat, I had to include it in this whole segment about Kenny Pickett and just that draft class and how crazy that evaluation turned out to be. Nobody could obviously plan for that, but both the Steelers and now the Eagles can move on, and all of these teams that drafted all these guys obviously had better hopes for them. But I think a positive from that is that they weren't afraid to move on from all of these guys. I know the Steelers probably had the most to lose because they drafted Kenny in the first round, and all these other guys went third round and later. But regardless of that, it's always moving on from Ridder, who was the starter, Malik Willis, who had a chance, Matt Corral, who had success at Ole Miss and was also viewed as a guy with good potential. But it turned out that none of these guys really lived up to that. They still could. I'm not saying that they're just done. But again, I thought it was crazy of how it all turned out. And overall, my thoughts on this whole trade and this whole situation, it got ugly for a little bit because of all the behind closed doors sort of reports and what was said to someone, what wasn't said. But I think this was the best situation overall. Kenny did have a chance to prove his abilities. Was it unfair with bad coordinator play? Yeah, but you can only control that to a certain extent. And this whole NFL is about winning, and the Steelers haven't had winning in the playoffs specifically in a long time. I think it just got to them. They wanted to break that, and they cleared house, got rid of all these guys, and brought in a new group of guys that they expect to be these X-Factor kind of players that leads them into more success going forward. I mentioned before, I don't think any of these guys are done, but it will be difficult to beat out a Jalen Hurts, a Kyler Murray for Desmond Ridder, and now serving as his backup. It'll be difficult, or Sam Howell as well in Seattle backing up Geno Smith. That one's a bit more optimistic, but I don't think they're done completely, but it will be an uphill battle for sure. And on top of all of that, I started this whole thing by saying that the Steelers gave me it felt like a breath of fresh air, that they're more aggressive, trying to create a change to this team. And Omar Khan, props off to him for being this sort of catalyst for change, not sticking around and being okay with just getting by, winning some regular season games and barely making the playoffs. He wants to see more change. And since his time with the Steelers as their general manager, he's had no problems trading Chase Claypool, Kendrick Green, who they drafted to be their center, didn't work out. Kevin Dotson, who's now with the Los Angeles Rams. He just traded Deontay Johnson, and now he's traded Kenny Pickett. So, I think they've come to a point where they're done accepting this mediocrity, this just mid-level team that is always going to hang around. I like it. I'm a big fan of it, and I think they're definitely not done. This offseason is still young. I expect them to make some more moves in regards to wide receiver, get in more weapons for these quarterbacks because they'll need it. And on that topic, I will send it to another break because I did mention quarterbacks. They traded away Kenny Pickett. They obviously signed Russell Wilson, and they traded for the Bears' former quarterback in Justin Fields. That was even bigger of a story than this Kenny Pickett trade was to me. So I'm going to get into all of the details surrounding that after the final break of this show. I'm going to give you all my thoughts on that Justin Fields trade and all of the reports that came out surrounding that trade, other shooters, the Bears doing right by Justin Fields. I'll give you all the details on the other side of this break. You're not going to want to miss that story. That is coming up next on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Back here one last time on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk some more about the Pittsburgh Steelers and all their quarterback controversy and all the news that broke. The most recent of those stories was the one around Justin Fields and finally finding a new home this offseason, coming over to the Pittsburgh Steelers. In that trade, Justin Fields was traded to the Steelers for a 6th-round pick in 2025 that could become a 4th-round pick depending on playing time, specifically if Justin Fields plays about 50% of the snaps this season. So that was it. That was all they traded for Justin Fields. A lot of people felt a certain way about it and how the Bears really didn't get anything out of this trade for how good of a talent Justin Fields is projected to be. He's still very young. To get a 6th-round pick from him, I think says a lot, not only about where the Bears are in their market, but another quarterback class that really didn't succeed a lot. And it's crazy to have back-to-back quarterback drafts that weren't really supposed to pan out like they have done, but this draft class in 2021 included Trevor Lawrence, number 1 overall, obviously to the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's the only starter out of the biggest names from that class. You look at Zach Wilson, he's a backup and likely to be traded away from the Jets. Trey Lance was traded away to the Cowboys for only a 4th-round pick. Justin Fields now traded for a 6th-round pick, obviously, and Mac Jones traded away to the Jacksonville Jaguars for a 6th-round pick. It's insane to me to see the value decrease so drastically for these guys that were all drafted in the 1st round, within the first 15 picks of the 1st round. How valuable those picks are. First 15 picks in the whole draft are now getting traded away for 6th round, 4th rounders. It really is a crapshoot when they always say that about drafting quarterbacks, and I've always said it on this show. It depends a lot on the situation and how much you invest in these quarterbacks to make it to the best of their ability, to get the best out of their ability, I should say. And just a few years later, it's proven that these teams weren't really able to do that, and now these other quarterbacks have to look for a new way to find success in the NFL. But going back to Louis Riddick, he was one of the guys that praised this move for the Steelers. RG3 was another one that praised the Steelers as well for making this move. A lot of people had the Pittsburgh Steelers being the best situation for Justin Fields, and I agreed when I first heard the news, but I also wasn't really a believer initially because I thought that the Falcons were going to go all in on him. I thought it made too much sense for him to go back home to the Falcons, but with all the reports saying that they felt Kirk Cousins fit their system best, it put me into doubt on where Justin Fields was going to go. And as the story went on and developed, I said that the Bears probably waited too long, and now you don't really know where to look if you're the Bears. Who needs a quarterback now? You don't want to give him up for a bag of chips, which is ultimately what they did, because I just felt like above anything else, they couldn't have both players, Justin Fields and whichever quarterback they drafted, on the roster at the same time. That was the red button. Absolutely don't touch that scenario. That can't happen. I just think the Bears got to that point where they reached out to teams reached out to them, and they just decided to pull the trigger. Ryan Poles hasn't shown that he is afraid to pull the trigger on any deal. He is going to get some slack for this, but ultimately I think a lot of players would have, or a lot of executives would have done this deal. And what came out further on this story was that Ryan Poles and the Bears wanted to do good by Justin Fields. That was really the biggest phrase that was repeated through all of this. On top of there being a soft market and not gaining as much attention as they thought they would, the biggest thing that was always repeated was that the Bears wanted Justin Fields to go to a right situation for him to still have success. They didn't want to just ship him off and wave goodbye to his career on top of being traded to some undisclosed team that really wasn't ready to integrate his talents. Adam Schefter was one that really spoke on this further when he said the Bears were not worried about compensation. They thought they were doing right by this young man. And you heard Ryan Poles say it a lot. that several teams reached out to them, were in talks with them this past week, but they were really looking for the best fit for Justin Fields where he could revive his career, like I mentioned, and not send him off to just some poor situation where they could just get him off their books, forget about him. They felt that he deserved better, and he probably landed in the best spot that he could have landed in. Another report to kind of harp on that theme of doing good by Justin Fields was by Courtney Cronin, the Bears ESPN reporter. She said that the Bears were actually hoping to get the same compensation that the Jets got for Sam Darnold, which was a second-round pick, a fourth-round pick, and a sixth-round pick. That was sort of the ballpark that they were aiming to get back for Justin Fields, but no one really met that. Or at least all those picks at once. They might have offered one or two of those, but really not what they were hoping to get back. And she also added to that the Bears had offers from a team with an established starter. It could have been the Philadelphia Eagles most likely, that sources say would have given them a better return for Justin Fields. But again, I keep saying it, that they felt that finding the right fit for Justin Fields to eventually be a starter and have a great career was more important than the compensation that they got. And I thought that was really interesting because you never see really that be the major selling point or the point that gets the deal over the line for a lot of these teams. A lot of them, like they should, quite honestly, look to get the best compensation back, to look out for themselves. But I think, like I've said before on this show, the Bears felt that they didn't do enough to help Justin Fields. And it says a lot about them and Ryan Poles, I think, that they were able to still provide some positive for Justin Fields and want to see him succeed somewhere else. And now they've also built a good program and team themselves. But, a lot of people won't be happy with the trade, but I think it was one that absolutely had to happen because you couldn't have him on this team any longer. And I think the longer that they waited, the less that they were going to get for Justin Fields. So I thought it was a decent trade, all biased aside, being a Steelers fan, only giving up a sixth-round pick. But going further onto this topic of the quarterbacks now in Pittsburgh, completely new quarterback room for the Steelers. You get rid of Kenny Pickett, Mason Rudolph, and Mitchell Trubisky, and you bring in Russell Wilson and really a younger, bigger, maybe more athletic version of Russell Wilson now in Justin Fields. It's going to be interesting what they do with them. I still think, like many people have reported, that Russell Wilson will be the starter because he is on a cheap deal, veterans minimum. The Steelers aren't really going to lose anything by playing him right away. I think he's going to be the starter, and Justin Fields will do the best to try and learn behind him, learn the offense, give him more time because, at this point in their careers, I think if you play Russell Wilson right away and he does bad, it's less worrying than playing the younger guy and having him play bad, getting all the criticism, being so young and putting more negatives around him and his career. You lose a lot more if you do that than Russell Wilson. If he plays bad, you bench him anyway. He's only there for a year. You're paying barely over $1 million to have him on your team. There's more risk in playing Justin Fields already as the starter than it would be Russell Wilson. So that makes sense to me from that aspect. And on top of all of this, they only gave away like a sixth-round pick, like I mentioned. In all of the trades Omar Khan has done with the Chicago Bears, the Steelers, in all of its totality, you think about it, they got the 32nd overall pick last year in the draft, which ended up turning into Joey Porter Jr. They got Justin Fields from the Chicago Bears as well, and they've only given up Chase Claypool, who's an unrestricted free agent and hasn't really lived up to any potential that he garnered coming out of Notre Dame, and they've only given up a conditional sixth-round pick. So, saying all of that just establishes and supports the idea of me and really being a fan of what Omar Khan has done for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And just this offseason alone, I think he's shown what kind of team and what kind of general manager that he wants to be for this team, and really setting the precedent for this team of not accepting anything less than, the standard that this whole franchise and its history really has to live up to. They haven't had playoff success in so long. They still sit at 6 Super Bowl trophies and haven't had a playoff win in about 7 years now. Now, I think they've had enough of that, especially with all the talk around Mike Tomlin and the pressure that he's always felt of having a winning season but no playoff success. Not only does this give him more of a chance to do that, on the other side, it almost increases the pressure more because you have all these players that a lot of people will argue there's no reason for you not to win at least one playoff game now. And I see that. I might even support that reasoning. But, teams, Super Bowl teams, playoff caliber teams aren't really established in March. You have to see how all these pieces fit. I'm a big fan of what they've done so far, especially at such a low risk for their team. The total cap hit for Russell Wilson and Justin Fields in 2024 is between about $4.4 million and $7 million. And to put that into perspective of other players and how much money that is, the New England Patriots are signing Jacoby Brissett for $8 million. Daniel Jones is taking up $47 million for the New York Giants and their cap money. Zach Wilson is taking up $11 million. And Gardner Minshew, just signed with the Las Vegas Raiders, is around $7.7 million. You get 2 new quarterbacks with a lot of potential into your team now that costs less combined than all of those guys. And you could argue that these 2 guys, Justin Fields and Russell Wilson, are maybe better than all of those guys. So it's a win-win, in my opinion, for the Steelers because low risk, potential high reward with these guys coming in. And now, talking more about on the field and playing, is it impossible for Fields to maybe beat out Russell Wilson at some point in this season? I wouldn't say so. I don't think it's impossible to see Justin Fields playing maybe early. They do have some bigger games now, the Steelers, than they did last year. I think they're going to play the Eagles, the Chiefs, and the Atlanta Falcons, who are building an exciting team all this season. So there are some tough teams in there, and if Russell Wilson really isn't playing well, the kind of tradition and culture that this Steelers team is building now, really not waiting around with all these bad results, I wouldn't be surprised if they pulled Russell Wilson and threw Justin Fields in there. Who's to say that they couldn't play together? That all has to be culminated with Arthur Smith if he wants to throw in Justin Fields in there for a play or two to run a read option or something like that. That's an option, but I don't think it's impossible for Fields to eventually become the starter just this year. And going further on that, with Justin Fields, I think he has a 5th-year option coming up, so that's also important. You would like to see where he's at in terms of playing and where he's at in his development, where you want to see him out there against competition to give you more of a reason to pick up that 5th-year option or to not pick it up. So I think that's also a factor, but that also has to depend on how Russell Wilson plays and all of that. You can't really see that in March, unfortunately, so we're gonna have to wait to see how that all plays out. And overall, to sort of wrap this thing up, Alex Kozora, a Steelers journalist, on his X account, wrapped this whole situation up in a way that he said that the 2 biggest things that fueled all these changes that you don't usually see from the Pittsburgh Steelers are the unique opportunity to get both of these quarterbacks for cheap and the frustration and anger that I mentioned before of not winning playoff games in the last 7 years. I think they felt that pressure, they felt that anger, and they really felt the pressure from the fans and everybody that always makes sure to remind them when they're not playing good that they had to do something. They did now, and I think it's great for them to do it, and we're going to have to see where this all plays out. Like I mentioned, I'm a fan of this team. I like the aggressive moves. I like the way it's trending, and I do expect them to continue with this aggressive mentality just this season, probably looking at wide receiver. They still need a center, some more help on the offensive line, specifically at tackle, and potentially another corner. So they're not a Super Bowl playoff team there, but they're getting there. They're quietly having one of the best off seasons, and I couldn't be more happier as a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So that's where the Steelers stand now. A good start, but we're going to have to see how it continues on in this offseason. But that's where I'll leave that conversation. That's all the time I'm going to have for you guys today on today's episode. As always, please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Make sure to also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, X, and TikTok for more of all of the network's content. If you want to see more of me and this show's content specifically, check out the GSMC Sports Network channel and the Podcast Network channel for all the YouTube shorts that are on there, all of the recorded live entire shows that are also on there, and the individual segments that I also record on there. If you missed a certain segment or want to go back and just watch one specific segment, it's all on there on both of those channels. Make sure to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more football conversation and for more NFL talk from me, your host, Manny Maradiaga. Thanking you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys all tomorrow.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn ain't